is brought to you by our local chapters, the Eastern Upper Peninsula Unit and the Charlevoix-Emmet Unit. This forum is being live streamed to the League of Women Voters Eastern UP's YouTube channel, as well as over WSU Radio. This candidate forum will conclude around 8 p.m. As a reminder, Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. Polls open at 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. Absentee voting is underway. If you need to apply for an absentee ballot, visit the Michigan Secretary of State's website or talk with your township, city, or county clerk. Election information, including deadlines for absentee voting and registering to vote, as well as information about polling locations and identification, are on the League's website, and you can find that at www.vote411.org. My name is Jenny Deegan, and I am pleased to be your moderator for this 107th District Candidate Forum. I am a local attorney with the firm Nelson, Deegan, Forster, and Stickovich in Petoskey, Michigan. I reside in Harbor Springs with my husband, Jack, and our 3 school-age children, and I'm also a local member of our League of Women Voters. The team helping to make tonight's a success is Robin Jordan, the timekeeper, Penny Krim, who will be taking your questions live tonight, Kelly Jarvie Townsend, and Paul Warwick, who are working behind the scenes so that we can be here virtually. Thank you so much to our volunteers for their tireless work to make this forum happen tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We work to increase the understanding of the major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League of Women Voters is strictly nonpartisan. It neither supports nor opposes candidates, nor do we support or oppose political parties. Any event sponsored by the League of Women Voters will be conducted with the utmost respect of neutrality and nonpartisanship. Our intent is to conduct a public event with fairness and even-handedness. Thank you to all of you who are attending this evening's forum. We look forward to a lively discussion about issues important to all of us. And thank you most of all to our candidates, John Damoose and Jim Page, for stepping up and deciding to run for office. Democracy takes sacrifice and courage, and people who run for office exhibit these qualities. So thank you so much, gentlemen. Before I introduce the candidates, let me review the ground rules for this evening's events. Typically, we would have candidate literature out for you. However, in this virtual world, in addition to the comments you will hear tonight from the candidates, we also recommend that you check out their personal websites. The League's nonpartisan voter guide is also an excellent resource. And again, that can be located on our website, www.vote411.org. For tonight's forum, everyone except the moderator and the panelists speaking will be muted to both reduce distractions and allow the candidates to have your full attention. Our questions tonight have been compiled from various sources and focus on issues that have been flagged as important to our listeners. You, as the listeners tonight, can also ask questions during this forum by using the question and answer feature on your screen. If you do have a question for the candidates, we ask that it be written in a way that both candidates may answer and that it be respectful. Unfortunately, we only have a few time for a few of your questions, so Penny will do her best to sort through them all, and she will be asking your questions directly to the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement. They will speak in alphabetical order. After the opening statements, candidates will each take questions and alternate speaking first. Following their introductions, the candidates will have 1 minute each to respond to questions. Finally, each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes to present a closing statement. The candidates' responses and their statements will be timed by our local Charlevoix-Emmet League Chair, Robin Jordan. So again, candidates, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and let's get started. If at any time you cannot hear me or don't understand the question, please don't hesitate to let me know. Mr. Damoose, we are going to start with you with your opening statement for 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. The work you do is so important, and I appreciate you having this candidate forum, especially this year with what a strange campaign season it's been. And I also want to say thank you to my opponent, Jim Page, for your military service, for your career as a school teacher. And despite whatever political differences we have, you have my respect. And I also really appreciate that we both run entirely positive campaigns through the primary and through the general election, which hopefully would be a model to others in the future. And to the people of Northern Michigan and the Eastern UP, I believe we're on the brink of something great. It may not seem like it after the year we've had so far, but I believe in the next few years, we can make real progress on the things that matter most. We can create an economy where our kids and grandkids can stay closer to home. We can secure our energy needs. We can develop broadband infrastructure for all. We can preserve and protect our Great Lakes. We can restore the freedoms we've lost. We can bring more local control to education and develop a new focus on career and technical education to prepare our kids for honorable, stable careers in skilled trades and manufacturing. And we can do it all with a sense of grace and civility. For nearly 30 years, I've been involved in a business that has dealt deeply with all of these areas. I have the experience to help our district make progress towards all of these goals. I've worked closely with our nation's top political leaders on both sides of the aisle. And I've worked closely with our top military leaders and our top corporate leaders. And more importantly, I've worked closely with the men and women like us who are in the trenches in our nation's great factories and labs and schools, forming the bedrock of our communities. And the lessons I've learned from each of them will help guide me as I serve our people with a new measure of thoughtfulness and kindness. Now is a time for tremendous hope and enthusiasm, and I'm proud to be part of all that's happening in our spectacular 107th district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page?
Thank you. And I again want to thank you for participating or having this event. It's a great honor to be here and to participate in it. And I want to thank the people for joining in and watching this. It's a good period to have in here, and we need to present our views as we see it. As he said, thank you, John, for your honoring me for being a service member and working as a teacher. And that's who I am. I am a Marine Corps veteran, and I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps. I am a retired public school teacher. I spent 28 years teaching school, mostly in the middle school area, right here in the Sioux area of public schools. And I am an avid outdoorsman. I hunt, I fish. I would be out hunting and fishing almost all fall and summer, and ice fishing in the winter. I enjoy our environment. And because of my enthusiastic outdoorsmanship, I'm an environmentalist. And I think it's very important that we protect our environment throughout this district. And I am also a union member and proud to be that. So I want to serve our community and represent them and represent the people of this district and their views. I'm an everyday citizen. I have no desire to go any farther than what this is right now. And I look forward to representing the people of this district and fighting for a livable wage in this district and making things better for us here. All right, and that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page. So we're going to start our questions now. Mr. Page, we will be starting with you. Our first question is, since January of 2020, more than 215,000 Americans and 7,200 Michiganders have died from the COVID-19 virus. What kind of healthcare and public health strategy are necessary to protect the health of all Michiganders, especially if there is another wave of COVID case in Michigan? Mr. Page?
Thank you. This is a question that's very important. We have to protect our healthcare system and maintain it, for one. We need a public strategy that will be guided by the health and the guidelines of the Michigan Health Department, the CDC, and other healthcare professionals. We need to follow them. We need to have them tell us what to do and make sure that they do it. We need to wear our mask. We need to continue to wear our mask. We need to wash our hands frequently. We need to practice and keep our social distancing. That's what we have to do to keep it. If we get worse, if we have a continual outbreak and it gets worse, if they say that we need to avoid or stay at home and avoid large gathering, that's what we need to do. We need to follow them. And if there's an outbreak, we need to follow the guidelines that they institute and do the, what do you call it? The tracing, the contact tracing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Mr. Damoose, you now have the floor.
Okay. Well, obviously, there's a role for government here. And one of the primary functions of government is to help keep our people safe. So I extend a measure of grace, especially in the beginning of all this, to both our governor and our president, because this was entirely new. And I think they both had the best interest of our people in mind. That said, I think the crisis ended up being handled sort of poorly here. First, there's a reason why we have three co-equal branches of government. That's how we get the best minds in different perspectives working together on this. And I don't believe the governor was right in circumventing the legislature for so long. We also need more common sense. Closing the garden aisles when they did that at Walmart, but keeping the toy aisles open was totally unnecessary and only added to a sense of alarm. Worst of all, we let it get way too political. People are at each other's throats right now, and that's just wrong. The wearing of masks should not be a political debate. It's not how we get through a crisis. So I believe we should have also started with regional solutions. We have here in Michigan a much different problem than they had in Wayne County, and I think we need to learn from our mistakes and do better next time. Sorry for going over.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Our second question, Mr. Damoose, we'll start with you. On May 14th, armed protesters entered the state capitol in Lansing to protest Governor Whitmer's executive orders to stop the spread of the COVID virus. On October 8th, a violent, detailed plot to abduct the governor was uncovered by the FBI and state officials. Could you comment on the nature of these events and the serious threats posed to our governor and other government officials? And what is your position on guns on the Capitol grounds?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll take the guns at the Capitol. I spend a lot of time at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and there's no guns there. I mean, I totally support our right to keep and bear arms, but I don't think this is one of those slippery slope issues. Personally, I would find it hard to work with a rifle pointed at me from the gallery in the Capitol. And a friend of mine even pointed out that if a group like that walked into Walmart, everybody'd hit the deck. So there's some things that we shouldn't do, even if technically we're allowed to do. And that style of protest, I don't think helps anybody. But ultimately, this is something for the Capitol Commission to decide, and I know they're working on it now. But I'm more concerned about actual violence. So let me make this clear. The plot against the governor and Michigan police officers was just horrible. Domestic terrorism and violence have no place in American politics. Whether it's a group of extremists plotting to kidnap our governor or a mob attacking police officers, it's just terrible and should not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page? Yeah, this is one that that bothers me a great deal because first of all, I'm going to condemn the act of domestic terrorism that was intended in this case. It should not be allowed. It shouldn't happen. I also condemn the rhetoric of our leadership that has gone on and that has led to this type of an event. When you have a president that is suggesting that we need to liberate Michigan, and we have other signs out there that I go around this district and I see signs in the yards that basically says our governor is an idiot. Those type of rhetoric is not appropriate and is leading to this type of event. So I condemn those. I condemn the white supremacist groups and other groups that support violence. Weapons in the state capitol should not be allowed. It shouldn't be in. We're not allowed them to have them in courthouses or county courthouses or the state capitol. They shouldn't be done in the state capitol at all.
Thank you. Mr. Page, we will move to you with our third question. What are your three priorities for improving Michigan's infrastructure?
Okay, for the infrastructure, their first priority that you have to really work on is funding. We have to work on the state budget and make sure that we have the proper funding to redo the repairs, necessary repairs. Now, I've seen reports and seen lists out there where we have top priorities that are going to happen throughout the state. They already have that list made up. We need to make sure that we have the proper funding to make sure that we can get those repairs done and repair our bridges and roads as necessary and any other infrastructure that's out there. We also need to protect our water system. We need to make sure that our drinking water is safe and that we have water system for everybody in this state that out there, and provide clean and safe water. That's the other thing. The other one on infrastructure is going to be the broadband. We need to expand the broadband to get internet services out into the rural communities.
Thank you. Mr. Damoose?
Okay, well, my first priority is rural broadband. It's critical to the future of our economy, and we saw the importance during the shutdown with so many of our kids trying to learn with lousy internet connections. Some couldn't even get the internet at all. Plus, it's the key to attracting more full-time residents, which is what I think is going to fix our shrinking schools and our seasonal economy. The next priority for me is roads, but I believe we have to be honest about this one. We've created a huge shortfall in the state based on shutting down our economy, so the roads simply aren't going to be fixed as quickly as we hope. I think what we need to do is do the best we can with the roads, which means redirecting a lot of control back to the county road commissions, who can best determine where to spend the funds locally. And my number 3 priority is build the Line 5 tunnel. We need the resources the pipeline provides. We have to protect our lakes, but we also have to stand with our people. And it makes no sense to have this 67-year-old pipeline in the straits when we've got a solution like this tunnel, which is being paid for with private money. It's an excellent win-win situation for the whole state of Michigan, in my mind.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I think your answers will lead into our next few questions as well. Mr. Damoose, starting with you. Does the legislature have a role in overseeing projects like Enbridge Line 5? And if so, how do you see that role carried out?
Absolutely. And this, like I just said, is a big deal to me. First, so many people who say shut it down offer no answers on how they're going to meet our energy needs. They throw out words like renewable energy as if that's going to magically appear. I mean, we all want that, but it's going to take some time. Shutting down the pipeline would be devastating, especially in the Upper Peninsula. So that said, I feel like the Line 5 tunnel is an example of when government is actually working. I think we have a perfect solution here. It's a model of the public sector and private sector working together. Think about it. We all agree the 67-year-old tunnel needs to be replaced. That's just common sense. The state needs the energy, not just for oil, but we need the propane to heat our homes. All sides came together to develop a solution to build this tunnel. A private company is going to pay all the costs and maintain it for 99 years. The state will actually own the tunnel and oversee every aspect of construction and safety. So it's a great compromise, and there's no excuse for a small group of people to hold up the process through lawsuits and delaying permits.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page, you have the floor now.
On the Line 5 issue in itself is completely false. Some of the statements that he made. Well, the fuel that goes through there is Canadian oil going to a Canadian company. The United States only gets, or Michigan will only use about 5% of the oil that goes through it. It is not funding our economy. It is not part of our economy. Okay, that is completely wrong. As far as the Upper Peninsula goes, it is not a major event. The only thing that we use is propane up in here, and the propane can be supplied by rail. There is not a great, it's very, very minimal, the amount that's in there. Those are both misconceptions by Enbridge. The government has an issue or has the right to manage the system that's going through it for the protection of our citizens, protection of our natural resources in there. Okay, and that is the role of the government to do, not to fund or not to take over situations that Enbridge is not going to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. So stepping into another issue that you both identified as being important, which is protection of water, drinking water in our state. PFAS contamination, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances have been found in multiple wells near the Petoskey Airport, as well as in other parts of the state. What can the legislature do to address this issue and protect the drinking water in the 107th district? Mr. Page, we start with you.
Yeah, the PFAS is a complex issue because it's more than just one formula. It's a whole classification of chemicals that are out there. And to clean up that system is virtually impossible because of the number of chemicals that we have, okay? When we find that contamination, we need to provide safe water to the environment or the community that's affected by it. And if that means cleaning up the water that's coming out and doing that through it, or doing another system in there that will give them clean water, we need to do that. We need to fund that and make sure that it gets done. The best way to stop the PFAS is to eliminate their use. We need to take it out of the foam for the fire protection and not use it at the airport as much as they have. We have to come to an alternative view. We need to stop and control the use of PFAS in our industrial sites. So it's just a matter of stopping the use and limiting the use of PFAS in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Damoose?
Well, I just participated in a Zoom conference with the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, the Ecology Center, the National Wildlife Federation, the Sierra Club, Clean Water Action, and others about PFAS contamination. This is something I was really proud to do and happy they invited me, because these aren't necessarily Republican-leaning groups, but I was impressed that they reached across the aisle. We're only beginning to learn the impact of PFAS contamination across the state. And it's especially bad because evidently this isn't something that can be cleaned up like an oil spill or other environmental disasters. According to this group, there really aren't even ways to break down these chemicals. So the solutions are more in line with building entirely new city water systems where none existed before. So first, we need to know more about what works to solve the problem. So we need to dedicate more funds to research. Next, we need to have a highly customized solution based on each specific location. The answer in Pellston may be a new city water infrastructure. In another place, it may be an advanced membrane filtration system. But regardless, the state is going to have to be ready, nimble, and act strategically whenever possible on this.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to expand on that question because I don't think you had much time to answer that. In terms of Mr. Page, starting back with you, what role would the legislature play, though, in terms of protecting the water? Is this something that should be done on a statewide basis or a community-wide?
It should be a national issue. We need to protect it throughout the whole nation, not just in the state level, because PFAS affects this whole country. All right. We need legislation that prevent the manufacturing of it and the use in some of the products that are doing that. So we need to have an alternative. We need to use the science to come up with alternatives for the fire protection or fire foam or whatever that is that they're using at airports. We also need to take it out of the industry where they are using it in different areas of food production and plastic contamination. That's part of it, because I'm told that PFAS is used on wrappers at fast food chains or in other chains where it's used for protection of the wrappers, and it's PFAS. It's on the wrappers, and it can be, once it's discarded, it goes into the waste, and it goes into garbage disposals, and it ends up into the system, down in the system. So we need to eliminate the use.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Mr. Damoose, again, specifically, would the legislature have a role in regulating this issue, or should it be on a more community-wide basis?
Well, I actually kind of think I answered that. I mean, the legislator needs to commission some serious study of the problem, first of all, and we need to dedicate the funds to do that, because again, this is just starting off. We've found a problem up here in Pellston. There's one down just near Muskegon, which is a total disaster, and they need to work on how to do that. Secondly, I think the state is going to have to come in. Nobody has figured out how to solve this yet. So that's why I say we need to be strategic and nimble and ready to assist wherever we possibly can. So we need to be, as a state, working with the people in Pellston to identify exactly what the problem in Pellston is. It may be to manufacture an entirely new city water infrastructure. Other cases, like the place down near Muskegon, it might get away with a membrane filtration system, which the state should help them pay for and help them execute. I think the best thing the state can do is bring together groups and companies and organizations and figure out a solution and strategically, step by step, take it on. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Again, sort of branching off from your original question about the infrastructure, starting with you, Mr. Damoose, how would you work with the executive branch and agencies to ensure that all Michiganders have affordable internet service?
All right. Well, now we're speaking my language, and I've already been working on this issue quite intensively. I've been hosting a series of meetings with people who are directly involved in delivering broadband across our district. And this means multiple meetings with different telecom providers, with the Telecommunications Association of Michigan, which represents smaller characters. And I've even reached out to learn more about Starlink, which is Elon Musk's program to blanket the Earth with thousands of small satellites that should cover the entire Earth's population, some think as early as 2021. There's so many great programs on the horizon. So I believe what we need to do is we need to streamline the licensing process. This is what I keep hearing over and over again, that's slowing things down. And we can make real progress on this in the next few years through another public-private partnership here to provide all our citizens with affordable broadband. And since we just learned how to study and work remotely, this is more important than it ever has been. I think it can radically transform our economy and attract a whole lot more full-time residents.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page, to you.
Well, I think we need to continue the work that we've been doing. I think the Governor Whitmer has initiated grants that have provided for local rural areas. We need to continue that and expand the use of those grants to provide rural access to internet connectivity. We also need to expand the private industry and the cooperation between our state government and private industries to expand it through the utility companies and cable companies to expand the broadband. We need to do everything that we can to get it out into the rural districts. And we use whatever technologies that we have. Even if we have to go to the point to where we go back to the rural electric legislation where we had to say, you need to provide the services to these local communities outlined. That's was done with the electric companies back in the 30s. We might need to do that in this day in the 2020 for internet.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Moving to you with our next question, Mr. Page. As a state legislator, what will you do to support the concerns of people of color and Native Americans in the state of Michigan?
This is an interesting type of question for me because their concerns are actually my concerns. We have very little differences between people of color and Native Americans in my district in here. I work very closely with the Native Americans in my community. I usually am going to them for advice and information to how do you answer this question? How do you feel about this topic? And I get input from them. As far as people of color, I've always worked well. I've been over this country all over the place. I've served in California to Washington, D.C. I don't have a problem with it. I actually support Black Lives Matter. I do endorse their reforms, the police reforms, and I'd like to do that as a state legislature. I've continued that. I'd like to lead by example.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Mr. Damoose, the floor is yours now.
Well, I come at this issue from a different perspective than anyone in this election because I'm in an interracial marriage and my 4 kids are multiracial. And I'll say that, to be honest, from that perspective, I'm tired of being judged by white liberals who think they know best on racial issues. The challenges my family's experienced over the past 25 years don't define us. Sure, it's tough to see my kids coming home after they've been made fun of for being different, which has happened. But my response is always the same. I do not want them growing up feeling like victims because the only one that hurts is them. Instead, we've taught them to look at their background as a point of interest and then move on unless it's something so egregious we have to address it. So how will I support the concerns of people of color and Native Americans? The exact same way I treat the concerns of everybody else. Because I believe in listening to people, treating them as equals in every respect, and doing whatever is appropriate to help. And in my mind, it's absolutely unconscionable that at this point in our history, we're still dealing with racial divisions. There's no room for racism in this country, and it's personal for me.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Back to you, Mr. Damoose, with this question. Our population, both nationally and locally, is very divided at this time. What will you do as a state legislator to help bring us all together?
Okay. Well, throughout my career, I've been working to promote a renewed sense of grace and civility. It's why we produce films on Arlington National Cemetery and the Medal of Honor and NASA and so many others, is to find things of which all Americans can be proud. And I've said it a million times. This is the call of our day, and it applies to both sides. Make no mistake, Both sides are guilty. We need to elect people who have lots of experience working across the aisle, which I have. I've been involved in a number of very prominent groups nationally who are working to bring people together. I've worked behind the scenes on bipartisan efforts, and I know what works and what doesn't work. And I can tell you the way not to do it is by asking people to give up on their core beliefs and principles. It's perfectly fine for us to have different ideas. And yes, I'm a strong conservative, unmovable on certain issues related to life and liberty. But I've had meaningful conversations and built strong relationships with some of the most prominent Democratic leaders in the country. At the end of the day, even though we disagree, we can do that if we operate through a sense of grace and civility. We can leave as friends.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page?
Well, first of all, if you've got to lead by example and you've got to follow your own, and you've got to give the people what you do is what you say, and you've got to do with that. So you got to lead by example. And I will listen to the concerns of all the constituents of this district, and I will be respectful of them. And that's one of the things that we have lost, is that respect for the different opinions. And we got to stop that. We got to work across the aisle, and I intend to do that as much as possible. And I will not show disrespect, or I will try to work to bridge the divide with respect to our differences of opinion. And that's all it is a difference of opinion. You can't be disrespectful about the other person or their properties or anything else. It matters just showing the proper respect and decency to other people.
Thank you. Well, at this time, we're going to turn questions over to our audience. And I'm going to invite Peggy Krim, please, to bring the first question to the floor, and it would be Mr. Page that would be starting our discussion.
Mr. Page, what role would your personal faith play in your job as a legislator?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. It kind of wasn't.
What role would your personal faith play in your job as a legislator?
My personal faith would have very little to do with what I do as a legislature. I'm going to tell you that right now, because I think that we need to have a separation of church and state. I was born and raised a Lutheran by a very Christian woman. I know what Christian values are, but in the role of government, I don't think we should impose our religious beliefs on the other people in there. That, I say, is un-American. So my faith is my personal belief, and I will follow my personal beliefs, but I will not impose that on anybody else in the state or on the government. So I think faith is an important guidance to where you do your personal individual, but you do not impose it in our government and try to enforce it into other people through our government agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Page. And Mr. Damoose?
Yes, well, I'll say one thing, that separation of church and state doesn't appear anywhere in the Constitution. Even that phrase was taken from a letter written much later by Thomas Jefferson. It's taken out of context. What is in the Bill of Rights is this premise of freedom of religion, where Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And I must say, as a person of faith, one of my ways of exercising my religion is to become involved in the public square. So the First Amendment is about protecting religion from the state, not the other way around. That said, I would never try to force my faith on somebody else. For one, it doesn't work, because God only judges what's in the heart. But second, I do think we all need to recognize it's humanly impossible to separate one's beliefs about God and these big existential ideas from how they govern. This is true of an atheist, which is a religious belief, as it is of a committed Christian. So this is where my ideas of right and wrong come from, where my ideas of treating people with love and respect come from. So I don't think we have to separate the two.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Penny, we have another time. Do we have additional questions?
Oh, yes.
And Mr. Damoose would start with this question.
Okay. How do you plan to respond to constituents' questions and queries about issues facing us?
Well, okay. I'll tell you one thing, which has been a core part of what I'm doing, is I think I need to be around That's the biggest thing, is that I'll tell you two examples. One is I've already talked to a person who, if I win this, I'm going to hire, who has deep experience in the district. And he wouldn't necessarily have been my first choice, but he knows everybody around here. And I thought, well, this is why I want to hire him, is because you guys need help. The constituents need help right away on day one. You can't have two of us learning the job. So I've already worked that out. But secondly, I plan to spend all of my free time throughout the district, which is what I'm doing during the campaign. I mean, if you look at my travel schedule throughout the district, it's amazing. And I'm meeting with city leaders, I'm meeting with chambers of commerce, I'm meeting with 3 different heads of the hospitals up here. I'm meeting with as many people as I can. I'm trying to set meetings up with the tribe just to listen and learn, because that's the job.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. And Mr. Page?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I wanted to make sure I get the right answer.
How do you plan to respond to constituents' questions and queries about issues?
Did it cut out, or did I? Okay, how do I plan to respond to them?
Yes.
Being available to the people of this district is necessary. Holding office hours and being there with the office hours that is in there, so you can hear and talk to the people of this district. One of the problems that I think with our current representative is they set up office hours and he sends his one of his persons to go out there and not him. And he doesn't participate in his office hours. I would participate in the office hours, and I would be around this district to listen to the concerns of my constituents and respond to them personally. That means that's what I would do, and that's how I would handle it. And I would probably have an office in St. Ignace or in Mackinac City, to where it's centralized in there, and I would keep it that open as much as possible. And that's how I'd handle questions.
Thank you. Well, I think we may have lost Penny for a little bit of time here.
Okay.
I'm just gonna
It wasn't
see.
me that she.
No, I don't. It's the virtual world. We have to be prepared, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mr. Page, I'm going to start with this question for you. Affordable housing is a concern for many communities in the 107th district. What role should the legislature play in making affordable housing accessible, and how would you address it at the state level?
Well, affordable housing, there is no one button that's going to cure all the housing. There isn't just one item in there. We have to do a combination of things throughout the state to make affordable housing available. First of all, we would have to provide low income assistance for rent and rent subsidies, low income assistance there. We also need to make sure that we have a livable wage. And this is one thing that I really think that we need to work on, is to have a livable wage for our workers to come out of there. People that are making $9 an hour, $9 and $10 an hour, cannot afford to have a rent and afford cars and everything else. So a livable wage is part of it. And affordable health care will help the livable wage. So there is a combination of things: better childcare, better in there is daycare systems, and more affordable daycare systems. Also education to get more of a livable wage. So it's a combination of a lot of things.
Thank you, Mr. Page. And Mr. Damoose?
Yes, well, this is a big problem where we live here. It's such a resort area that we as residents keep getting pushed further and further away. And it's a real problem for businesses, even finding people to work who can afford to live in the area. It's something I'm passionate about. I'm also passionate about it because we want to attract as many full-time residents as we can, because a summer resident sort of comes here to get what they can from the area, but a full-time resident helps the schools, it helps the community, they really invest themselves. So there's a few things we can do to make this happen. It's all about supply and demand. So we need to somehow trigger more supply, and that, rather than government mandates that say X% of units must be reserved for low income housing, the goal has to be making affordable housing highly desirable for developers, and remove barriers like burdensome taxes, unreasonable regulations, fees, and permits. Plus, there's the MSHDA administers this federal low income housing tax credit. And right now, their rules heavily favor urban areas, and we need to, on the state level, fix that to help our rural district.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. I think we may have pulled Penny back into our forum. Are you available, Penny? Well,
Maybe she's got to unmute.
let's move on. We'll see if we can get up with her, get back to her in a little bit. Sort of piggybacking on that same idea, Mr. Damoose, public transportation is also a significant concern in our district. Affordable and reliable transportation can be a significant barrier to financial stability for many of the constituents. Can you comment on how best to address this?
Well, this is not so much. This isn't an area I've spent a lot of time thinking about because we have such a gigantic area. It's really not economical to do a whole lot of public transportation in an area like ours. We have to travel long distances here. And not only that, even in areas where it is economical, if you drive down to Ann Arbor, you see these gigantic buses that cost millions and millions of dollars driving around almost empty all the time. What they really are, the only time they're really used is during their big events like football games and art fair and things like that. So it's subsidizing basically rich people's travel. That wouldn't be what it is up here, but I don't think there's really an economical way to do it in our local district. So I don't know. I'm open to new ideas on this, but I really don't think there's a way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Page, you have the floor.
Yeah, what we need to do there is we have a system that's available in there. We have the EUP Transit and they have the Emmett County Transit down there. We need to expand that and we need to make it available. We have a problem with senior citizens with Dial-A-Ride. Dial-A-Ride is good for the city, but it doesn't always take care of outlying areas or rural counties. So we might need to provide a little bit of additional funding to expand that services into that area and allow Dial-A-Ride to go from the city to certain spots or to different areas in the community. It's going to be economically unfeasible to make a system for the Eastern Upper Peninsula because you've got this large area between Pickford and Cedarville and everything. And I don't think we can do it that way other than having some type of community bus system like the EUP transit system that provides a route through there. And that's going to be hard to do.
Thank you. Penny, do we have you back online now?
I am back, but it says my internet is unstable. I don't know what questions you have asked. Were you asking just out of the Q&A or were you asking from the emails?
Nope, I was asking of my own accord. So go ahead with what you have.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. We do need broadband. Here we go. What is your response to claims of voter fraud with mail-in voting?
Mr. Page, we will start with you on that.
I have never seen any evidence of voter fraud in any of the absentee ballots or any of it. I haven't heard it through the state or through this nation. I think that is one of the big myths or fake information that is being put out there. There is no problem with absentee ballots. The last 2 elections or more, I can't remember, it's been 3 or 4 elections. I've used absentee ballots just because of the convenience that I can sit at home and fill it out and use it. There is no evidence to support the false information that there's a problem with absentee ballots or voting by mail. And I think it's a good system.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Mr. Damoose?
Yeah, I'm not terribly worried about voter fraud. I mean, when it was first being talked about in the spring, I was worried that people were going to race into something that wasn't good, but I think I was wrong on that because there is integrity in the system. There are lots of checks and balances. There's lots of good people from both sides of the aisle watching every detail of this elections. I mean, there'll probably be some instances of voter fraud, especially since we did change the system so close to an election, but I don't think it'll be too significant. I'm not worried about it. I just want people to vote, and I love them to vote for me. So,
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Penny, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. Do you support Michigan's current school funding plan? If yes, why? If not, what specifically do you propose as an alternative?
Mr. Damoose, we start with you on that.
okay. Well, I mean, we have a lot of experience in the public schools. My wife's on the local school board, for full disclosure. We've had 4 kids go through the public schools, and this is very important to me. The current system is not working until people in our region are getting the same level of investment as the students in Detroit. And a lot of this comes down to a funding model that we need to redevelop that takes into account transportation requirements, which are huge up here. We also need more local control. I believe that we waste a lot of money from top-down mandates from the state and the federal government. I mean, both Republicans and Democrats. Bush had No Child Left Behind. Obama had Race to the Top, and this put huge taxes on, it was hugely taxing for our school districts. So I've also spoken with people from major public universities, and this might be one I'd be willing to change. So I spoke to one from a major university bringing in $323 million per year from the state, in addition to raising, on top of that, tens of billions of dollars for capital projects. And I simply can't see how that's right when we have district people in our district, teachers making $28,000 a year.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page?
Yeah, funding for education, having been a retired teacher and teacher in public schools for over 28 years, this is something that we really have to work on. We need to make it fair and equitable throughout the state. One of the problems that you have, as indicated, you have some school districts that are getting $10,000 to $11,000 per student, and you get other school districts that are only getting $7,000. And that's not equitable in the area. If it costs, and we're underfunding our education system by about $2,000 per student throughout the state. So we need to come up with a system of funding our schools that is equitable and will fully fund our school system. And that means we might have to work across the aisle and get a compromise system that's going to be standard, and it's going to be operated from year to year, where school districts know what they're going to get the following year, and it's not going to be decreased. It's not going to be political.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Penny, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. Do you think that we have systematic racism problem within the law enforcement, or do you think police officers are being unfairly attacked?
Yeah.
We would start with Mr. Page on this one.
Yes, and I do believe that we do have systemic racism in our whole system. I think it's nationally in there. I think it's an issue that we have to address. I see discrepancies in how we enforce laws in our justice system. We need to make sure that we have equal and fair justice. I think that, like any profession, you have good and you have bad. And when there is somebody that does something wrong, they need to be prosecuted and held accountable for it. As a union member, and a union steward and a union president, I agree that they have to have legal protection. But if there's a bad conduct that is being done by a police officer, that needs to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And that's just it. We need to make sure that we have proper reforms for the police officers and make sure that they're fully trained in racial discrimination.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Mr. Damoose, to you.
Well, I want to be absolutely clear here. I support the police at every level. Just like there may be a few bad teachers out there, there may be a few bad police officers. And the police officers I've talked to will be the first to tell you that. But I do not believe there's systematic racism within the force. I think this idea of defund the police is among the most irresponsible ideas ever proposed. And frankly, I think we need to give our police a break. They risk their lives for us every single day. And yet there's talk about removing personal immunity and making police personally liable for mistakes on the job. There's protests going on around the country, dragging them down at every chance they get. And I've talked to a bunch of police officers. I've got a lot of friends who are state troopers. And a lot of them are starting to wonder if it's even worth the trip to stay on the job. That's just appalling in my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Penny, do you have another question?
Yes. We have had legislators in recent years vote straight party line on more than 90% of legislation introduced. What are your concerns, if any, about voting in step with the party line on all legislation?
Mr. Damoose, we start with you.
Yeah, I'm. Can you repeat it again? I honestly couldn't. I couldn't hear exactly what you said. What are my what?
Okay, here we go. We have had legislators in recent years vote straight party line on more than 90% of legislation introduced. What are your concerns, if any, about voting in step with the party line on all legislation?
Yeah. Okay. I have no intention to support on all legislation on a party line. In fact, I think it's one of the problems out there. I mean, there's certain core beliefs that I have that I'll never violate, and I've been very clear about what those are. But here's a couple areas where I sort of differ from my party. One is public education. Two is healthcare. I'm a major supporter of public education. I'm a product of public education. My wife is on the school board. We have 4 great kids. 3 of them have graduated from Harbor Springs High School and are at some of the best universities of the world. And we've had a great experience. So our first educational priority, I believe, should be to help our public schools. And a lot of times, I don't think there's a perception that that's what Republicans think. Secondly, is healthcare. I'm not a supporter of the ACA, but we got to be honest, the system that was there before wasn't great. We had a bad system in place where, as a small businessman, I used to pay those bills, and every year they'd go up 20%, 21%, 22%, 19%. Nothing else did that. And I think in a wealthy country like ours, we should be able to do better. We should be able to protect people with pre-existing conditions and make sure our poor are covered.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Mr. Page?
Well, we need to work across the aisle. We need to come to a consensus on doing things. One of the problems that I see with legislations that is being proposed, and the reason that it's being done on party lines is one party writes the legislation, supports the legislation, and it goes through by party line. And it's not working in there. We need bipartisanship. We need to come together. And if you have legislations, when you go to a committee meeting, it should be a committee of all parties concerned, and they should all get together, and that should come out of one committee with all recommendations in there. You need to compromise. You need to work together to come up with legislation rather than one party saying this is what we want and pushing that through. And that's where you get the diversity or non-diversity of voting just for the political party or along political lines. So you have to look at the issue and work together as much as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Penny, I think we have time for perhaps one more question.
Well, unfortunately, when I lost my internet connection, I lost access to the Q&A. Megan, can you pop up and ask a question, please?
Yes, absolutely. Hang on just 1 second. Let me bring that up. All right. So the very last Q&A. I believe it's the one that came in at 7:51 p.m. So it says, our locally elected government members in Sault Ste. Marie have lobbied our state representative to end the tax loophole for corporate stores such as Walmart and Meijer. Will you work to close the tax loophole so corporations pay their fair share in taxes and so that tax money can be invested in local services and infrastructure?
Mr. Page, we start with you.
Really simple. I will support legislation to close the dark store loophole in there. It has taken funding away from our public schools, our local government, and our local officials in there. It is something that is a tax loophole that should never have been allowed. And we need to close that tax loophole. That's an example of one of the poor, and people are suffering because of it. So I support the closure of the dark store loophole.
Thank you. And Mr. Damoose.
Yeah, this whole dark store theory is actually kind of complicated, and I'm a bit split on it. I'll tell you why. One, obviously, we default towards protecting our city governments, and we don't want somebody out there unfairly taking advantage of that. But their basic argument is that these stores build these gigantic big box stores that are totally useless if they are the ones occupying it. So what you're really doing is taxing them for who they are. And most real estate is taxed based on the building of itself. So they do have a point there. I think you got to handle it a little bit carefully because it's very easy to say, oh, no, let's get them. Let's hit them with taxes. And then you know what happens is you look at the city of Sheboygan. There became a big fight and Meijer decided not to build there. Now, who lost? I mean, a lot of people in Sheboygan say they lost because you lost the jobs, you lost the good access to good prices and goods, and it's just not really a great thing. So I think you got to be fair about it on both sides. So essentially, oh, I'm out. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose.
Thanks.
I think at this portion, I want to thank everybody for their questions. We are going to move into our closing statements now. As a reminder, you each have 1.5 minutes to talk and sort of sum up your positions. Because we started with Mr. Damoose for opening, we are going to start with Mr. Page for the closing. So, Mr. Page, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I appreciate the time that you have spent on this. I appreciate everything that's going on there. I want to thank you for doing this. Thank you for John for participating in this. Okay. It's necessary to have an educated voters out there to learn the issues and to talk about the issues. And I appreciate the time and the opportunity to do that. This election is important to me because I think it's for the heart and soul and the guidance of our entire our country. And we need to get out there. And what I want to encourage everybody to do, whatever your choice is, get out and vote. If you're going to vote absentee ballot, get your absentee ballot in, take it in there and drop it off, get registered to vote. One of the things that I do not like about our district is in there, we only get about 50% of the electoral registered voters that actually participate in our elections. So let's get out there and vote, and let's support the candidate of your choice and make sure that we get a representative that responds to your views and your opinions. And that's the thing that I would like to close with. Again, I'm a retired teacher. I'm a military veteran. I'm an environmentalist and outdoorsman, and I look forward to having your support in this election. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Page. Mr. Damoose, you now have the floor.
Yes, well, I always thought I'd go straight into politics after college. I studied political science at Michigan and was the president of the College Republicans, but thank God I waited. Instead, I pursued a career in filmmaking and advertising, and in the last 25 years, I've had the chance to work closely with some of the nation's top military, political, and corporate leaders. I've also worked with factory workers at GM and Ford, and with kids in career and tech ed courses. I've worked with teachers and shopkeepers and car dealers and astronauts and families, and you name it. And from each of them, I learned something about the way the world works and how society works. And all the while, I was running a small business where I carried the gear, I paid the bills, I handled the QuickBooks, filed the taxes, chose the healthcare plans, cleaned the office, you name it. Everything a small business person does. And most importantly, my wife, Margot, and I have raised a family with 4 beautiful children. And anyone who knows me knows that that family is the most important thing in our lives. My top priorities are clear: to promote skilled trades and manufacturing careers, to grow local businesses, to improve access to broadband, and give our kids the option to stay closer to home. I want to restore the freedoms that we've lost and ensure better responses to future emergencies. And I can tell you that whether you vote for me or not, whether you vote at all or not, I want to represent everybody in the 107th district because I want to serve you, which means you'll see me as often as possible in every corner of our district in every spare moment, because that's the type of representative I believe you deserve.
Thank you, Mr. Damoose. Candidates, Mr. Damoose and Mr. Page, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to thank you very much for participating in tonight's forum. This was, I would say, a wonderful exchange of information in a very respectful manner. And thank you also to the audience for listening and participating with your questions. This was, again, very helpful. For more than 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been a trusted source of objective and nonpartisan voter information. The League of Women Voters encourages every citizen to be an informed and active participant in government and to make their voices heard. You can make your voice heard on November 3rd by voting. Please visit www.vote411.org and or the web pages of our local league chapters, both in Charlevoix-Emmet and the Eastern Upper Peninsula, for additional election information or learn how to join your local chapter. This concludes our forum. And again, thank you very much, candidates, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. And thank you, Jim.